This is priceless advice for finding your destiny from someone who's really done it. Hello and welcome back to the Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence, the podcast helping seekers of truth, spirituality, and psychic powers to discover true fulfillment. I'm Darren Ball, co-host of the show, and in this episode we're going to be talking about the purpose of life and how it can help you to find your own purpose in life. We'll also be sharing the story of Richard's own journey to discover his purpose and some of the amazing synchronicities that happened along the way. And then finally, we're also going to be sharing the story of someone who apparently gave up everything to follow his own inner voice and discover the key to lasting happiness and fulfillment. So today's big question for you, Richard, is how can you find your destiny? And I think this question goes right to the heart of, sometimes the underlying sense of purposelessness that we can feel. When we don't feel like we're doing exactly what we should be doing, perhaps where we should be doing it even, and where we're asking ourselves what that might be. We're also going to be talking today about someone who definitely did answer that question in his life, what we can learn from his experience and the advice that he gave others. So I thought maybe, Richard, we could start with just answering the question of what destiny is about anyway.
Yeah, well, we all have a destiny. It can be a very, very significant one, and we could think of people in history who have a little world life-changing destiny.
Sure, yeah.
And there are other people who don't even attempt to have such a destiny at all. I do believe your destiny is written, but you are the editor. And that's a little thing that is like a trigger. Actually, you're a bit more than the editor. You can rewrite big elements of it. You can make it far, far more than it could be.
Yeah.
And you can manifest it in different ways. There's a lot of people, isn't it a strange thing that there are people out there who have on paper everything that they could possibly want, really. People find spirituality in many, many different ways.
Totally, yeah.
Some through crisis. It wasn't my case. For me, I had a wonderful childhood, really. I had everything you could possibly want.
Yeah.
But there was something really missing for me, which you could broadly call the purpose of life. And by finding the purpose of life, I found the purpose of my life.
Yeah.
The two came together.
Well, that's quite a good tip there, isn't it?
Yes.
Cool.
But, there are people out there who do have, I've met a few who've maybe had a nervous breakdown even, or some real tragedy in their life, or a great loss, maybe a great financial loss. Everything was going fine. And then through that, they've turned to spirituality. That can happen, and it can be a way. We're all different. But for some people, it's not that. They've got everything that the world tells us you should need and that should fulfill you, and they're not totally fulfilled. And they're honest enough to admit it as well, which some people aren't, to themselves at least. And it's because they are suffering, I believe, from soul repression. We talk about emotional repression,
Sure.
sexual repression, and so forth. We don't talk about soul repression. And it's a very debilitating thing because there's a part of us, especially someone who is, shall we say, more advanced through the lives, which knows, but it's in all of us, we all have exactly the same potential. In that regard, we're all equal. But some people have evolved at different stages more than others in different respects.
Yeah.
It's crying out for true wisdom. It's crying out for answers. Hopefully, people come to this show partly for that reason, because what we provide on this show is the why factor, not the X factor, but the WHY. That's a very corny thing. But in all seriousness, people aren't really satisfied with what they've got. Because there's a part of them that knows they are not fulfilling their destiny.
True.
And that's the key. We're all different. But one thing we shouldn't do, why is it that most people, if they're religious at all, choose the religion of their birth? There's no particular reason to suggest that just because you're born into a particular religion, that's the one that's true, and the others are not true, which is a mistake in the first place, because there's truth as Ramakrishna said with his wonderful parable of the elephant, blindfolded 4 boys, and they all touched different parts of the elephant which they'd never done before, and they all gave 4 different descriptions, one the trunk, one the side, one the tail. And then they came out and he said, that's like God. That's like the religions. The elephant is God. You're the different religions. You've touched different parts of that God. And of course, Ramakrishna, great saint, he lived it because he entered samadhi, the high, deep state of meditation called samadhi, through different religions deliberately. He was Hindu background, but he practiced a Christian, Muslim faiths and achieved the same state, just to prove that point.
So, I'd love you to take us back through, maybe your own life a little bit. I mean, when we talked about this recently, you told me about what it was like finally arriving at Hull, where you went to university, and the sudden click you had that this might be the moment, the time when you really do discover that. What was it like leading up to that period for you, and then that moment when you discovered?
Well, as I mentioned, I had a wonderful childhood. Great opportunities. My parents had enough money. I went to private schools. They were very good schools. I had lots of friends. Yeah. Everyone has their problems at different times.
Yeah.
But I do remember waking up one morning at the age of 14, getting out of bed and suddenly saying, what's the purpose of life? And I hadn't done that before the age of 14.
So just
one morning.
Okay.
And my first thought was, okay, well, somebody must know that.
Yeah.
And, I found they didn't. Long story short. And I was bugging everybody with it. And, I asked the priest, I asked my doctor the next time my parents took me to see a doctor. I asked the priest, I asked my parents, of course, and their friends.
Yeah.
And it was becoming such a thing, me doing this. The thing that actually, what did distress me was not so much not knowing, although that was a problem for me then. And in a very good life, and, most people weren't going around worrying what was the purpose of life at the age of 14, I suppose. But what distressed me was that they didn't really care. There's that wonderful story in Autobiography of a Yogi by the great Paramahansa Yogananda. And he describes one of these yogis, and they were strict. They were tough. Some of them would be in trouble nowadays with the rules we have now.
Yeah,
they were so strict. But someone came to see him who wanted to learn from this guru, and he said, what do you want? He said, I want to know the meaning of life. I want to find my destiny, my spiritual evolution. I want freedom from rebirth and all. And so the guru, and I want to be your student. So the guru grabbed hold of this lad, stuck his head in I think it was a basin of water or something.
Okay, yeah.
And held him there till the boy nearly, old man, I don't know if he was a young man, nearly felt he was going to die, couldn't breathe. And he pulled his head out in time and said, what did you want most when your head was in that water? And the man said, air, master. He said, when you can tell me its truth, I'll teach you. Now go. And dismissed him. And that was his test. Very strict. Indeed. I don't know what happened next.
Yeah.
But I'm not comparing it to what happened to me, but I was distressed by the lack of concern from people. I mean, my father was well connected in sort of semi-government circles, so I would be going to these formal cocktail parties and at the age of 14 in a dinner jacket.
Sure. Okay.
Those days, and meeting some sort of well-connected people. And they didn't know. They found it very amusing, actually, when I would ask. But my parents thought this is a bit odd. So they decided I needed to visit a psychiatrist because I shouldn't be wondering what the purpose of life was.
It just says so much about our world, doesn't it?
They wanted to help, and that's all good.
Yeah.
So, but I reassured them, by the way. I remember reassuring them. I said, look, I'm not suicidal. I'm not, I'm not going to do anything. I just want to know the purpose of life. That's all this is about. Anyway, you go and see this person. So this chap, he sat down. I'll never forget it because I walked in, and I was a 14-year-old. I was adolescent. I was a little stroppy, I suppose. I sat down. I said, well, my parents are paying good money for this. They tempt me here because I want to know the purpose of life. What is it? Which is not what he expected.
No, it wasn't.
And he didn't. He said, well, in my day, Hitler was alive when I was your age, and so it made life a lot easier. I thought, he doesn't get it. That's not, I'm sure that was tough, but that's not what I'm asking. So what he actually did was he gave me, I think he might have been a Freudian psychiatrist in those days, for adolescents. he gave me some pictures of dogs doing various things, including going to the loo and the toilet, if people don't know the word loo, and other cavorting with each other sexually and all sorts, and asked me to fill in a form. So I fill in this form and how I reacted to these pictures. And he basically said, well, you're perfectly normal, and I'm sure it will pass. He says, as a matter of fact, when it does pass, you trying to find the purpose of life, can you let me know? Because I'm doing some research for my other adolescent patients, and I want to be able to tell them.
It's so weird to think about.
It'll go away. You'll stop thinking about it. Yeah, this is absolutely true. And he said, the only thing I would recommend you to do is to start masturbating. That was the only advice he gave me.
Gosh.
And I think you want to see the back of me, actually.
Probably get you out of that room.
This is annoying questions coming along. And anyway, that was it. But then I threw myself into all sorts of things like teenage and had great fun. I had a rock band. I had, starting to have girlfriends and etc. But always in the back of my mind was this question: what really, though? What is the purpose of all this? And I think linked to that is what is my destiny.
Totally.
But I sort of put the two in one for me, and it turned out to be true because they are one for me. So then I was going to go and study philosophy and theology at Oxford University. I hadn't sat the exam, but I was in the group to do it, and I knew the college. And I remember an English teacher calling me up and saying, Lawrence, why are you going to study philosophy and theology? So I said, because I want to know the meaning of life. This was my sort of, I want to know the purpose of life. Yeah. And he said to me, that's the last syllabus that will teach you the purpose of life.
Wow.
Those are his exact words. And, I don't know whether he should have said that, but he did. He was the English teacher, but he was trying to help me. Yeah. So look at it. Look at the syllabus here. So, it's Ramaic, Aramaic, Greek. It's logic systems. It's this, it's that. That way it won't show you. He was a believer in English. He thought English was the thing. So, my father said to me, well, what you do all the time is music and drama. Why don't you just do that and sort it out later? And there was only one university in England at that time that did music and drama together as a syllabus. And they only had one place, actually. As well.
So one place.
Yeah, and so I went to Hull University. But while I was on the train going up there on the first day, I was reading through the societies you could join, and one was the Buddhist and Vedanta Society, and the other was the mountaineering. There were plenty of others, and those, although I did know mountaineering, I picked those two societies to join. I got there, I looked at the sky, I remember, on the first or second night, and I looked at it and I thought, I'm going to get an answer here, because this didn't happen by chance. There's a plan, there's a design. You've only got to look, I believe, at the galaxy, and there's a design, there's a purpose. At least that's how it comes over to me.
Yes, I think a lot of people can resonate with that. Yeah.
And anyway, long story short, I joined the Buddhist and Vedanta Society, went to a lecture. It was given by a good friend of mine called John Holder. It was about how to pray in a yogic way, and it was about the Aetherius Society and Dr. George King. And through that, I found what I'd come for, which is the purpose of life. Because at that time, Hull had a group of the Aetherius Society incorporated into its official societies.
I see, okay.
As the only university that did. So I found my answer at Hull. That's the story. And through that, I found my life's purpose as well. Now, we're all different. We have different ways of finding our destiny.
Well, at what moment did you feel that, okay, this is my destiny? Were you excited? Were you disappointed? What was the, how might people recognize that?
Well, it's a strange thing. Yeah. I read, actually, a book called Raja Yoga by Swami Vivekananda. And in it, it's the aphorisms of Patanjali. And there was a concept in there of Patanjali, who's really the father of Raja Yoga. So we're talking over 2,000 years ago, I believe. And no one quite knows much about him and his life. But everybody's followed it. Swami Sivananda, all the yogas, Yogananda, that you can think of. This is the Bible, as it were, of advanced meditation leading to full realization and full liberation in yoga. The Eight-Limbed Path. I read it and I thought, right, I don't know whether I recognized it, but I thought, yes, I know this works. Yeah. This is what I'm going to do. And the next day, I came across the Aetherius Society with the lecture I mentioned with John Holder. And for me, it's a strange thing because I was very excited about really going for these Patanjali, Raja Yoga, Vivekananda. And when I heard about the Aetherius Society, I knew it was greater. And what really stuck out, there was a few things. One was the cosmic aspect.
Sure.
But the thing that really stuck out was the element of service.
Okay.
And I knew, I mean, that's more important. You know, you could go off to the Himalayas for 20 years, but if you're not serving others in the most effective manner, I don't think you're going to find, especially in these days, liberation. I seem to know that. I certainly believe service outweighed my own development. And so, because of that, although I knew it was for me, my first reaction was mixed, because I had to I was already kind of giving up on a decision I just made.
Yeah.
But, of course, now, and pretty quickly, it was so much greater. And that's not to take away, by the way, from Raja Yoga. It's a wonderful path, and I still reference it now. And there's a lot in it, you know, because one thing about us on the Spiritual Freedom Show, we don't just put out one teaching, one system, a 100%. One and only way. There is no such thing as a one and only way. There are many routes and many paths, and we put out what we consider to be the greatest of them.
I think it's a great thing to emphasize, and it kind of ties back to your story about Ramakrishna that you told a little bit earlier as well.
But I knew it was what I had to do very quickly. It made complete sense to me and, you know, changed the whole trajectory of my life.
Yeah, I think you know, some takeaways that I just pulled out of that, and then I want to bring in, you know, the icon that we have today, because I think there's some similarities there, in the sense that you know, there were a lot of things that you had in life that many people will have in life, you know, and in some way you could look at it externally and think, well, this is a full life. I mean, what else do you want, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just to name one of them. I mean, this rock group I had with, you know, we'd been asked by EMI, somebody at EMI, to go on the road and you know, do gigs, and then we probably had I had no doubt that if I'd gone down another of these routes, it could have worked.
Yeah.
You know, my idea behind that, as I'm sure other artists' idea, is to, you know, help others through that and
through the art,
raise consciousness. I don't think I use that phrase, but
sure.
But, you know, it just wasn't as important as this.
Because I think for that takes a certain degree of, you know, intuition or inner knowing to be able to choose that path forward.
That's the key thing. I think you've hit the real nail on the head, the inner voice. And that has to be satisfied. And that comes back to our person who's ticked all the boxes. You know, they've got the nice family, they've got a nice... I've met so many of these types of people, you know, everything's good, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's not a bad thing. So they've got a good job, a car, and all the things that people are told that they need to have.
Sure.
And yet the inner voice isn't satisfied. The inner voice is urging them onwards. And do we follow that inner voice? And you could say it takes guts to follow it.
Totally.
But you could also say that it's in your own interest to follow it, because you will never be fully satisfied until you do.
And you'll never be as fulfilled as you will be once you do find.
You will never be totally fulfilled.
Yeah. Well, let me bring in, you know, the person that we wanted to share today, because I think he's someone that very much did this. You know, when I looked at his bio a little bit, I mean, he was a respected writer on theology, an organist, an authority on Bach, but he gave all of that up to become a medical missionary. And he took that up. I think it resonates a lot with the story that you told, because that he could see that it was the most useful skill that he could learn to help others, you know, going into the study of medicine. And that he devoted his life subsequently to helping people in that way. I mean, setting up, I think he set up a hospital in French Equatorial Africa, a leper colony. And, you know, while that might seem like a sacrifice to a lot of people, to him it was the ultimate fulfillment of what he felt was his purpose.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that you can have people in privation? I mean, how tough must it have been to work in a leper colony?
Totally.
You know, you can have people under great limitation, people who give up a lot of wealth, and this has happened through history.
Yeah.
I mean, people have sold great estates in the past or donated them to a particular church, for example, or some other cause, and gone into a monastery or something like, because they regarded that as their vocation. And yet, such people can be much more happy. And that's a word, that's an important word.
I think so too.
You're happy in yourself.
Yes, yeah.
You know, a lot of people, do you know, one of the ways not to find happiness, I think, and this has come out, I think, in quite a few studies, is to seek happiness. What you need to seek is purpose.
Okay.
What you need to seek is what is your destiny,
Your
if you want to use a
purpose,
phrase. I mean, you know, there are forms of divination we should mention that will claim to tell you your destiny, but they've got to be translated. And some, with the best of intentions, psychic readers and people who practice divination translate it through their own mindset. So they'll see something, for example, wealth, as being material wealth. Well, it might not be material wealth at all.
I see.
Yeah. It's got to be translated for the individual, and everyone is different. I mean, I was told once by a very good psychic, actually, that I'm going to have a ranch in, I think, a part of New York State, and I'm going to have this and that and the other, which I didn't have. But I did have my best-selling book published, you know, in the New York area and later on and things like that. Now, it wasn't the money, that's not the point of it to me.
See.
It was because I used the money to promote the work. It's the manifestation of what I would regard as wealth, which is the opportunity to spread truth. And of course, if you spread truth, you receive truth. That's karma.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing for us all to remember. I think if I just take us to our quote here from Albert Schweitzer, he says, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I do know, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve."
Isn't that wonderful? Because it's so true, and I think everyone actually listening or watching this will know that, because they know the difference between, just take a simple thing like cooking. Cooking for yourself can be, you know, perfectly great, perfectly fine. But if you cook for others and then they enjoy and they benefit from the meal,
that's a good illustration.
It's a silly little example, but there's a certain satisfaction you get, and it doesn't have to be cooking; it could be anything else. You know, for example, in the field of music, I came across a band when I was into all those things, which was only interested in what they wanted to play themselves, and some people liked it, some didn't. They didn't much mind. But if you actually want to reach people, doesn't mean you've got to sell out and be popular.
Totally.
But you've still got to stick to what is right. But you want to, your interest should be in the listener. Your prime interest, not even maybe the listener now, might be the listener in 100 years.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's your interest.
Yeah. I think, just to pick up on one other word he said there, which you highlighted, is the happiness.
Yeah.
It's like, as you say, that to be happy in ourselves, to be at peace with ourselves, that we have had the courage to break away from whatever conditioning or expectations there might have been, to listen to our intuition and to follow a path that we know that will bring us true fulfillment.
That's very true. And the spiritual path does lead to happiness. It's not permanent. It shouldn't be. Anyone who's permanently happy in this world, there's something wrong with them. You've only got to look at the state.
Considering the world,
But it will lead to happiness, and it's a happiness that, although you have to leave it to engage in some of the unhappy situations in the world, it's always there. You haven't lost it. It's not like a material pleasure that evaporates as soon as it's over, and all you've got is a memory of it. This is something that still lives. It's something you can tap. It's something you can have a happiness that makes your whole being. I think there's a quote from the Master Jesus in the 12 Blessings, as channeled through by Dr. King. It's along the lines of, every cell of you will rejoice and be happy in this light.
Wonderful words to leave people with. Thank you.
Now, what I loved about that episode is that understanding the meaning of life and your destiny are kind of the same thing, right? It's about helping others. And I think we all know that intuitively because we know how good it feels when we do that, but it helps to acknowledge it consciously as well. It's what Albert Schweitzer did, remember in the story that we shared with you, it's what Richard's doing, it's what I'm doing, and that's what's working for us. And finding your destiny is about listening to that voice within you, right? It's about that inner knowledge that knows that you're not quite yet doing what you're meant to be doing, and being brave enough to take the step to act on that knowledge, right? No matter what anyone else thinks, about the decision that you're making, because the reward is not only finding and following your destiny, but it's also about finding true fulfillment. Now, if you enjoyed that episode about finding your destiny, check out this video over here, which goes deeper into understanding your destiny of ascension, which is something that we all share. Or this video over here, which goes deeper into understanding a technique of prayer taught by Dr. George King that can help you to transform your life. Thanks for tuning into the show. See you next time.